What's up everyone and welcome to AudioFire. My name is Peyton James and I'm the founder of AudioFire.co, where I teach podcast creators how to level up their audio. In this video, I'm going to cover how to get better podcast recordings. I'll give you 8 tips to keep in mind during the recording process so that you can improve the quality of your podcast recordings. Let's get into it. Alright, so let's dive into these 8 tips to get better sounding podcast recordings. Number 1 is to find a quiet space for you to record. So whether you're in a house, an apartment like me, or in an office space, it's really important that you find a noise-free environment or relatively noise-free environment for you to record your podcast episodes. You want to be really easily understood. You want your audience to be able to hear you very clearly, and you don't want them to have to really struggle to hear what you're saying. So it's really important that you find a space that's closed off from a bunch of extraneous noise going on. Whether that's outside noise or just noise within the house, it's really important that you find a quiet space to record your podcast episodes. So if you've already tried recording your podcast and find that you have a bunch of noise issues going on, maybe that simply means trying a different time of day for you to record, where there's not a bunch of traffic going on outside, or even kids running around in the house, or animals going crazy, or planes flying overhead, whatever it may be for you. Maybe just try a different time of day for you to record. It could also be a difference in location that can make the difference. So for example, in my apartment, if I'm in my living room, I might hear a bunch of outside noises because I have a sliding glass door that would be right next to where I record, right? So I instead record in my office space, and that is more closed off. Even though it has a window in it, it's still more closed off from that outside noise than it would be in other parts of my apartment. So no matter where you are, try to find a good time and place for you to record your podcast that is closed off from a bunch of extraneous noise that could get into your podcast and be really distracting in your episodes. You're also going to want to be aware of your placement within the room, and that means things like flat surfaces, like hard flat surfaces, are going to reflect a lot of sound waves and bounce back into your microphone, right? So you want to avoid being close to things like desks that will reflect right into your microphone, the corners of a perfectly square flat room and flat walls that don't have stuff in it to really absorb the sound waves or deflect them. You want to be aware of where you are within the room, the size of the room, how flat the walls are and surfaces are, to avoid a bunch of unnecessary reflections that get into your recordings. All right, number 2 goes pretty well hand in hand with number 1, and that is to be aware of your surroundings. So there's actually a ton of noise that goes on in our everyday environment that we've just become accustomed to and we don't even notice anymore. So that could be things like the air conditioning that's running, the hum of a refrigerator or even dishwasher, laundry machines running, or even just things like traffic outside and things like that. Now, it's always best to cut off the noise at the source instead of trying to fix it in editing and post-production. So if you need to, go ahead and shut off your fans before you start recording. Make sure that you're away from really loud sounds within the house, and that will just save you a lot of time and effort in the editing process to try to get rid of those noises. If you cut them off at the source, you don't have to worry about it in editing. It's always best to get the cleanest recordings you possibly can. Now, I know that it's practically impossible to get rid of everything. You're going to probably have some noises in your recordings. It's not possible to get everything out, but try to keep it to a bare minimum. That way it's not distracting in your episodes and takes away with what value you're bringing in your podcast episodes. All right, so tip number 3 is to actually wait for external noises to pass. This actually just happened before I started recording this. A plane flew overhead and loud traffic was passing by, and I decided to wait instead of trying to talk over that, because that's going to be in the background and be distracting. You've probably heard, some podcasts where there's traffic going on in the background. I know that it's not possible to get rid of absolutely everything, but if you do have things like a plane flying overhead, if you just stop and then you restart your thought once the noise has passed, it's going to sound so much better. So again, just do yourself a favor and get it right during the recording process so you don't have to worry about editing out all that noise during your editing. And if you were in the middle of a thought, then just restart your thought and start over and complete the thought instead of picking up midway through a talking point. If you do cut during, just when the sound occurs and then you pick up right in the middle of a sentence, the cut is going to sound very obvious and weird, and your tone is going to be different. And so just start your thought over and complete your thought. So tip number 4 is really simple, but it's effective, and that's having the proper mic placement. And a lot of people just don't know how their microphone actually works. They don't take the time to make sure that they know where the microphone actually picks up their sound. So someone might speak into the wrong part of the microphone thinking that's where it picks up, and then it's going to sound not nearly as good, right? Another thing would be they tend to stand like really far back like this, and it's going to sound much more thin and not sound nearly as good, right? And they're not going to be within a good proximity of the microphone. So understand how your mic works and position it at a proper height and a proper distance in order to get really good sounding quality recordings. You can have the most expensive, fanciest mic in the world, and if you don't know how to use it, you're still going to get terrible sounding recordings. And on the flip side, just like with any other sort of camera gear or things like that, even if you don't have the highest budget or the most fanciest, like most expensive gear in the world, you can still get really good sounding recordings if you know how to use your microphone, you know how to use your gear. So take the time to test it and move all around your microphone and try different distances and see what works best for you, what sounds the best for you. Tip number 5 is to get a pop filter to use with your microphone. Now, a pop filter is this windscreen here that sits in front of your mic, and it catches any excessive wind blasts that happen when you pronounce really strong consonants like P's or B's. When you get those wind blasts into your mic capsule, it causes this distortion and just really rough sounding recording, and you don't want to have that. You want to have something that is, I want to say, between $10 and $15 typically. And it's just like a really important accessory that will make it sound much more natural, much more clean, instead of getting sounds like right? So take the time and invest in a pop filter that will really do a lot of good for your recordings. Another thing that you can get is called a shock mount. Now, I don't have one here, but a shock mount essentially will suspend your microphone in this a basket of elastic bands essentially, and those bands will absorb a lot of like bumps. So if you hear bumps in the microphone, you know, a shock mount would prevent you from picking up those sounds in your recordings. So again, pop filters and shock mounts are both really inexpensive, but they're very useful for eliminating a lot of unwanted noises in your recordings. I would definitely go with a pop filter first because that's going to be the most effective at the beginning, and then I would invest in a shock mount as soon as you can. Tip number 6 is to record room tone. Now, what is room tone? Well, it's precisely just the tone of a room. Now, each room, you may have noticed, has a different sound. So if you think about, you know, an office space compared to like an empty warehouse, those have different tonal qualities, right? So it is important to capture the tonal quality of a room in order to use for splicing together edits, and it makes it more seamless and more natural sounding, rather than if you cut and you completely cut out your audio, it's going to sound a little bit jarring and not as natural as it would if you had a smooth edit that had the tonal characteristics of the room kind of spliced between. So even if it's just silence, if you just record 30 to 60 or more seconds of silence, not moving around, not a bunch of extraneous noises happening, and you use little clips of that to splice between your edits, then you're going to get much more natural sounding cuts, right? So it's really simple use of your time. If you just sit still for 30 to 60 seconds and record, make sure there's no noise that's going on during that time, and then you use little sections of that to splice between your cuts, then you're going to get much more natural sounding fades and much more natural sounding transitions. Tip number 7 is to record your audio at a proper level. So if you record at too quiet of a level or too low of a level, you're going to need to boost that up in your editing and mixing process in order to, you know, have a good level to listen to. But if you recorded super low, then when you boost it, you're actually going to have a lot of noise that's introduced into your recordings because of having to boost that low level signal. So you're going to have a bunch of hissing or buzzing or just background noise that you might not have noticed that you were picking up because you had it at such a low level. That's going to be very prevalent when you boost it in your post-production process. So if you record at a proper level, you can eliminate that from happening. On the flip side of that, if you record at too high of a level or too hot of a level, you're going to introduce what's called clipping, and it's just going to be distortion and crackling and just really unpleasant sounds that you don't want to have in your recordings, right? So make sure that you record at a proper level that is what some call a healthy level, right? That is really good and picks up a good signal It's not going to have to be cranked in order to hear it and introduce a bunch of noise, and it's not going to cause clipping and distortion. So for me personally, I'm trying to set my level between -12 and -6 dB when I'm looking at my meters when I'm recording my audio. And this brings us to tip number 8, which is to stop expecting perfection. Now, actually, I have had a kind of a rough time trying to get this recorded because I'm, recording in the middle of the day on my lunch break. Actually, I work from home and I'm doing this on my lunch break. And I live not too far from an airport and not too far from a busy road in my city. And so I heard all sorts of noises going on that I had to stop and wait for, and it made things a little bit longer. But I know ultimately, because I'm more trained at, I'm a professional audio engineer and I'm a little bit more trained at the editing process, I know that I can eliminate that as much as possible. And I just want to say that I'm more of a perfectionist when it comes to that sort of thing, but really just stop expecting everything to be perfect, because even me as a professional, I'm having tons of things happen that are probably going to squeak through in the recordings, and that's okay. People are understanding of that as long as you do your best to eliminate all these external noises going on and you get the best possible levels that you can with your recording, and you just share great value with your audience. It's okay. It's okay if imperfections happen. You shouldn't expect for perfection, but try to strive for the best quality that you possibly can. And simply just being aware of these tips can help you really improve your podcast recordings. All right, for your next tips, be sure to go to my website, AudioFire.co, where you can learn more audio and podcast production tips and tutorials, and you can find out how we can work together to level up your podcast audio. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep making waves. Take care.